Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Boudica. Now, this is the brand new Jesse V. Johnson film that's coming out this week on October 27th on all digital platforms here in the US. And I was very excited for this movie when it was announced that he was going to be making this his next film. In fact, I remember when I read, I think it was like some article from somewhere that Jesse V. Johnson's new film has been greenlit, Boudica, and it's about this, and that. I was really excited for it because, one, it's a period piece, and I know he's been always wanting to do period piece for quite some time, but when I read his social media post, that's where it really got me very excited and anticipating this project, because I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but it was something to the effect of, I think he had said something like, to say that this is a movie that I've been wanting to work on for a very long time is an understatement. Like, this is something I am very passionate about. And once I started reading his post and expressing his enthusiasm for this film, I was very excited to see what he was going to be doing with this project, because, one, it was going to be shot in Wales. It's a period piece. And he's got some incredible actors that were casted in this movie as well, too. So I had some very high hopes for this movie. In fact, I remember messaging Jesse after the fact. I did. I sent a message after the fact, and I said, this sounds like to be a phenomenal project. Can't wait to see it. And based on your enthusiasm for this film, this may be your best movie. Just hearing with what you are going to be doing with this film. And I was very confident when I said that to him. I was like, this is probably going to be your best film. Then I saw the movie recently. I've seen the movie a total of 3 times now. I will be truthful and say that this is not my favorite movie of Jesse. It's still a good film. There are some great qualities about this movie that I will get into here with this review. Unfortunately for me, the one thing I was actually genuinely surprised with when I saw the movie is that how underwhelmed I felt with the overall story. Again, that's not to say, though, that because I was underwhelmed with the film that I was not entertained. There were some great entertaining value factors in this movie that I really did take away from each and every time that I watched the film. And Jesse, to me, is one of the best directors working in the industry right now. I always feel that Jesse, along with the likes of William Kaufman, Kyle Kuya Harris, Brandon Slagle, various other directors I've come across here, Derek Presley, Brett Benman, just to name a few. There are some great films that these guys have made that really shows me that if they were given more time, more money to really truly showcase what they could do at a higher level, if you will, that you can really see what these guys are truly capable of here. And I always think that Jesse is one of those directors that keeps getting better and better with each and every film he's worked on. Even some of the films I didn't like as much as some of the other ones, there's always a great quality of storytelling that he tells. And you can clearly see that with the more money and time and resources that he has, that he's definitely gotten better using those tools at his disposal to make the best film possible. But with this particular movie, though, I was really excited to see what he was going to do with the period piece. And it is still very much a Jesse V. Johnson film. But as I said before, I was a little underwhelmed with the overall story. Again, not to say that it wasn't a good film. I did enjoy it, but it's just not my favorite of here. So I will get into the plot synopsis here. I will not be getting into any spoilers. Of course, I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. King Prasutagus rules over the Assini people with his wife Boudica by his side. But when Prasutagus is betrayed and killed by Rome, Boudica's kingdom is left without a male heir, and the Romans seize her land and property. Driven to the edge of madness and determined to avenge her husband's death, Boudica rallies the various tribes from the regions and wages an epic war against the mighty Roman Empire. And that right there is a film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. Now, before I get into my positives, I will say that I was completely unaware of the story of Boudica. I don't remember ever hearing anything about her at all. Even when they had announced that this movie was going to be made with Jesse writing, directing this film, all I read was that it's based on a true story on a real person, and that was the extent of my knowledge with her from what I read there. Moving forward, I never looked into it until about, I think, a day or two prior to seeing this movie for the first time, where I went on YouTube, typed up Boudica, and tried to find some insight about her background. Then I was surprised to learn that there's really not a whole lot of information out there about her. In fact, there's really nothing at all that's more or less concrete about what had actually happened, other than certain stories that are told, in this case, by the Romans who had taken over England at that time. And the way that they described the Celtics were just pretty much painting them in a negative light, that they were savages, they were animals, they were just ravaging through their cities and their villages. And we're such sophisticated people, and that we're noble and we're this and that. But they left all the important details of, well, we went over to their house too, took their shit, killed their people, probably raped a few of them too, and then kept their stuff and told them to serve us. And then leaving out that important detail, which is the reason why the Celtics were like, we're not doing this anymore. We're gonna fucking go out there and kill you guys now. And leaving that important detail out, I think, was something that was very interesting, because they definitely had left some information that a lot of historians were able to kind of put together to figure out what actually had occurred. But even with that being said, though, there's still not a whole lot of information about the Celtics themselves, especially with Boudica. I mean, they have some insight about what had occurred, but even then, it's not 100% concrete information to really say this is what actually had happened. So they had some insight about what had occurred, but outside of that, everything else is kind of left for us to wonder, because we really don't know much about her at all, if at all anything, I should say. So when I had learned about that, I pretty much figured out that, okay, well, they're going to take a lot of liberties here, and I was curious to see how Jesse would take on the story. So when I saw the movie, as I said before in the beginning of this review, that I liked this film. I did enjoy the movie. One thing I will say, though, that I remember the first opening, maybe 3 minutes of the film, you get to see that the Romans are ransacking this Celtic village, where they're pretty much destroying everything, and they're taking everything from everybody, and they're killing everybody as well too, and they don't hold back in the violence at all. I remember I saw that people's throats are being slit open, and then blood is going everywhere, body parts are being ripped apart. It's just, I was just, not to say I was shocked, but I was actually kind of surprised with the level of violence that the Romans were doing to innocent people. And I'll be frank, I was entertained, because like, holy shit, they're going to go all out with this. This is going to be a great movie. And then, but what's interesting is that when you get that opening sequence there, where everything is just pure hell for everybody in the beginning of the movie, all of a sudden, the next set of sequences that occur after the fact, you get to see Boudica with her husband and their children. They're living a wonderful, peaceful life, a beautiful landscape, and just, happy. And it's interesting to see that violent entrance to a peaceful event that occurred after the fact. It's a wonderful contrast, because then you get to see how all that starts to crumble along the way when the story of Boudica picks up from there. And what's interesting too is that Olga Kurylenko is someone that I'm aware of as a good actor, but there are times where when I watch a movie, like in this case with Boudica, I remember like halfway through the film I realized that she's a very good actress, and I don't think really gets a lot of credit for how good of an actor she really, really is. And there are a lot of films that I've come across with numerous actors where I forget certain actors are really good at their craft, and Olga's one of those actors as well too. So, and the reason I'm pointing that with her is because in the beginning of the story, you get to see that the person that she becomes, she is nothing like that at all. When you look at her, the first impression you get is you can tell she's someone that has great qualities about her as a person, really good person at that, and means well for everybody to be, doesn't want to disrupt anything. She just wants to keep the peace, despite the fact that the Romans are hovering over their kingdom. But she's working very hard to not disrupt anything, so that there's no violence caused on them and anyone else around them, even though she can clearly see that's happening around her. But she's just trying her absolute best to stay, to avoid trouble. So the person that we see in the beginning of the story, again, is not the person that she becomes, where she becomes a very powerful and strong leader, if you will. And on first impression, you don't get that at all about her. And when it was revealed to her that she is Boudica, she has no idea what that even means. So she goes to her husband and asks her husband, what does that mean? What's the importance behind this? And then he explains the whole story to her. And then she becomes a little surprised, because this person that I am is not the person that they think I am. I just don't see that. But she was very honored with that knowledge of people looking at her that way, as being the one person that's going to save them from the Romans. And when we see that her husband gets killed by the Romans, and then the Romans are taking her land, taking her everything else that her and her husband owned, and leaving her for dead, the very same people that revealed to her that you are Boudica then help her, and then eventually train her along the way to become the warrior that she is meant to be. And then you get to see that progression of her becoming more or less this like docile person to a very hardened and very determined warrior that's going to look out for her people now. So her motivation has clearly changed, but she's also doing to the fact that you killed my husband and my children, I'm going to get you now. What's also interesting too is that throughout the narrative, you do see that she's still talking to her children, but you don't, and I'm going to spoil it here, so I hope it doesn't ruin the film for anybody, but you get to see that and learning that her children are dead and she still talks to them and they're telling her, this is what's going to happen. You need to do these things. It's a very interesting aspect to her journey along the way, which actually really kept me invested in understanding her psychology as to like what motivates her in certain situations that are very difficult for her to handle, and having her children more or less be the guidance for like, well, you should be doing this, especially you don't do this, and this guy's like this, and so on and so forth. It's very interesting to see that rather than having her to, you know, kind of just take it on face value that she just did this because of doing it, but you have some motivation where you see where all her decisions are coming from when she has these interactions with her daughters, which I thought was a very wonderful way of telling her story along the way too. I will also point out too that it's also great to see a lot of Jesse veterans here. You know, you got Leo Greggs, who has worked with Jesse in Avengement, Nick Moran, who's worked with him before on Avengement, Accident Man. He was also in One Ranger as well, too. He had a small scene with in the movie, and then have him have a role here as well. So there's a number of actors that have worked with Jesse. Dominic Vandenberg is also in the movie. So when I saw him, I was like, holy shit, Dominic's my man, you know, because I think he's a great actor as well. And someone that I think is truly underrated in what they do. So to see him in the movie was a great treat for me personally. Now, as far as the directing is concerned under Jesse Johnson here, I always believe that with each and every film that Jesse works on, he is getting better and better as a director. I truly do believe that. I always think that Jesse's a massive storyteller, not just in the film medium, but I'm also talking about in general. Like, if you ever hear him talk, have him, you know, you've seen him, if you may have seen him on my show and various other people he's talked to in various other platforms as well. He's a really incredible storyteller. So for him to take on this particular project and seeing that he had more time, more money, more resources, it was a joy to see that he had access to all those things for him to tell the story to the best of his ability and to tell the best story possible. And I really did appreciate that, to see that in this movie, because I always feel like that when given more chances for him to work on these type of stories here, you really get to see on a larger scale what he's truly capable of pulling off. Because there are some wonderful moments here in this movie where you get to see some of these characters who are going through some major hardships and having to go through these internal struggles that they're dealing with here, with the external struggles as well too. On top of that, it's interesting to see how the massive stress that they are being dealt with here, and how they're having to deal with that along the way as well too. So, you know, when it comes to the overall narrative here, I found the story to be really interesting and really educational in a lot of ways as well too. Of course, there's a lot of liberties that are going to be taken here when it comes to the overall story that we're following here, because there's really not a whole lot of information out there about the story of Boudica that we're not aware of here. So I always found that to be quite interesting. Now, one last thing I will point out with my positives here is with the score of this film. Sean Murray is a composer that I am a massive fan of, and in my opinion, I think the score that he did in this film is phenomenal. I still believe that the score that he had done in Hell Hath No Fury is his best work. I love what he did in that score with that film. I think he did an incredible job with this movie too, when it came to the score and building up the emotions and having some room to be able to expand on, allowing the I guess I could say the best way I could describe it is like seeing the scenery, the emotions that are with the scenery, and having Sean's music infused into that to be part of that as well too, and help carry that along the way too. Because there are some moments, I'll be honest, when I remember thinking that I didn't really feel the characters' I guess emotional impact. Not to say that the performances weren't good, they were good. It's just I didn't feel at that moment. But as soon as I heard the music, then I was instantly hooked, and I felt the impact that it was supposed to have, because Sean's musical cues has certainly made that impact for me personally. So if you can do that as a composer, then I think you're really good at your job. And I think Sean is one of those composers that is truly, truly underrated. And I'm glad that Jesse had brought him in for this particular job here to do this, because I think he did a phenomenal job when it came to the score, just because I really did enjoy with what I've heard so far in this movie here. So for me, that's going to be in my positives. Now let's get into my negatives. With my first negative with this movie, one of the biggest issues that I had with this film had to do with certain aspects of the character's development for Boudica. Now, I will say again that Olga was really good in the movie. She is really, really good in the film. The problem that I had with the character development was the fact that there were some wonderful moments where you get to see Boudica be, the innocent, more or less the innocent person that she is in the beginning of the movie, that not the hardened warrior that she's become. And then seeing the journey of how she becomes more or less this hardened, powerful warrior leader, that's all there. I felt like some aspects of that was very truncated, where you have moments of that, but I felt like there's something that was missing for me about being able to have to flesh out certain details. But the funny thing for me is that they were certainly there as far as what I wanted to see. They were there. The way that it was handled for me personally, I felt it was too truncated for me, that there were certain aspects of other characters that were brought in to challenge her that took away the time that I felt like was necessary to allow her to figure it out on her own, or not necessarily on her own, but just figure it out, to have some time with her, if that makes any sense. Which is, it's kind of a weird thing for me to say, because you do have those moments, but there were certain characters that I remember that would come in that would challenge her and say, you're not even a warrior. This is ridiculous, and this can't do that, and you can't do that, and so on and so forth. And I always felt like that took a lot of time from her development, if that makes any sense. Maybe some people will completely disagree with me on that, and I would understand, but I always felt like when it came to her Boudica's story, that having her develop the time on her own probably would have served the story a little bit better. At least that's my perspective. But despite the fact that I'm pointing out that the certain aspect of development as a negative, all the pieces are there. It just didn't work for me all that well, and I did feel like it was way too truncated, because certain things weren't as fleshed out as well for me as I would have liked. The other thing I also want to point out too is that when it came to the reveal of her being viewed as Boudica by the other Celtic members, I did like how that was handled, but the way that it was executed, it didn't necessarily work for me all that well, because when it came to that reveal, when one particular woman was looking at her and said, "You are Boudica and you're going to free us," it almost came rather abruptly for me personally. That's not to say, though, that it didn't work. It certainly worked. It got the point across, and it certainly had the impact on Boudica herself. But somehow, when I'm watching it again, I thought maybe I was being too harsh on it. Like, I just didn't like the way it was handled. I go back and watch it again. I still had the exact same problem, where the way that it was executed for that revelation for her just didn't really work for me all that well, at least for me personally. But it definitely got the point across there. And then when it came to her becoming the warrior, that was handled fine. What I had, the problem that I had with the film was really the end of the movie, where I felt like it just was too abrupt when how it was executed at the very end. There was I'm going to use Braveheart as an example, and it may not be the best example, but it's the only one I can think of right now. That's a 3 hour and 15-minute film, I believe, and you have all the time in the world to tell that story, and you have time to develop certain aspects of the character. So when I'm making the comparison, that's kind of what I'm pointing at here too, about that part of the development. But when it came to the end of the story about what had happened to William Wallace, at least in the movie, the way that was handled, honestly, that's kind of what I was expecting with this one, because it's no secret that Boudica does die once you learn about this. But I thought that the way that her death was handled, although is powerful, I would say, but it just didn't have that impact on me personally. It just felt a little too abrupt for me, and it felt a little flat. And that's one of the biggest things that I remember walking away very underwhelmed with this story, where you had this great buildup and then it just fell flat for me personally. But that's not to take away that Jesse did not do a good job in getting the point across. He certainly did. Unfortunately for me, the way that it was handled when it came to certain aspects of certain story beats when it came to certain parts of the development, certain build-ups, and then when you get that build-up, it just felt a little flat for me personally. When you look at movies like Hell Hath No Fury, Avengement, Debt Collector 1 and 2, even Savage Dog, like you have those respective films that are very short, very limited in resources, among other things as well too. But somehow along the way, he was able to tell out these wonderful fleshed out stories where in this movie, you have, I'm not gonna say all the time in the world, but he definitely had more time, I could say, more resources, more money. And somehow certain aspects of these developments in certain story beats felt a little too truncated for me, that I wondered what had happened along the way. So I felt like there's a little more restriction in that respect that just did not click for me at all. But I still was entertained. I liked the movie, but it wasn't something that I was really underwhelmed with the overall experience with the film, because I wanted to love this movie. I believe me, I thought this was gonna be his best film. For me, I was hoping this would be his best movie. Unfortunately, it's not that way for me at all. Still a fun movie, still a good movie, but just not his best in my opinion. So for me, that's gonna be into my negatives. Now let's get into my rating. It's funny because I do enjoy this film. I really do like this movie. I don't love it by any means. I will say though, even though I walked away underwhelmed with this movie, I wasn't disappointed with the film because I still walked away enjoying the film. But it was something about this movie that I felt like the same exact feeling that I got with Avengement, Hell Hath No Fury, Debt Collector 1 and 2, even Savage Dog. Like those films, as I mentioned before, limited budget, limited amount of time, limited resources, and yet you got a full-on story that is fleshed out from start to finish. And although all those beats are definitely here in this movie, some things that I felt like needed to be fleshed out a little bit more, a little bit better, were too truncated for my taste. And I still think that Jesse's getting better as a director, but I'm not disappointed with this movie at all, because I still walked away enjoying the film, but I was really underwhelmed, which is what surprised me the most about this film, because I really was expecting this to be his absolute best. So for me, I would say this movie is a raise the glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. Now, if you guys have seen this movie, which will be coming out this week on the 27th of October on all digital platforms here in the US, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the NRW, share, like a video, hit the notification bell while you're down there as well. And also follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. Follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And that'll be it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Until next time, stay safe out there and cheers.